basically, to start, we wanted to, most of you know our story, but some of you are new to our journey. So we wanted to share a little bit about our story, just so you know you're in safe hands and in the right company.
Yeah.
We've made all the same mistakes that you're probably making in your relationship, which are really normal, but I'm sure most of you feel the same, that not everyone talks about it, and it feels like you're the only ones
that's broken,
struggling,
basically.
or that like you and your partner just can't seem to get it right. But relationships do take work, and the communication piece is the hugest piece. And we're not taught we're not given skills to communicate in our relationship. We literally take what our parents did, mash it together, try and work something out. And it ends up coming out normally as, this like first pancake, which is like a mess. The first pancake when you make pancakes is always horrible. No one wants to eat it. And we make some version of that in our relationships, and then wonder why isn't it working? And we were very much the same. We got together at like 14 and 15. We've been together 18 years. I'm sure many of you have been together a long time. And if you are watching the replay, you can let us know, how long you've been together, because that does impact your relationship and where you're at. The first 3 years, we're pretty much getting by in the beginning on like what got us into the relationship in the first place, putting our best foot forward, showing our best side, keeping our ugly side in the closet. We all have an ugly side, but we don't bring it out.
Going on dates regularly.
Going on dates, doing all the
trying
things.
to light that person up as best you can.
Yeah. So the first 3 years, often you don't notice it. Sometimes it will happen earlier, but not normally after the first 3 years, everyone gets into some strife because we show our true colors. We go, oh, there's actually this whole other side of me that you haven't seen. I can't actually keep up that expectation of perfect because it doesn't exist. And now we need to try and work out how to navigate this. And then as years go on, you're adding kids and, traveling, work, all these different things, different stresses, and it requires more of your relationship. But most of us don't continue to work on the relationship. We all have this expectation from Disney films, from like all these fantasies and books and things, that relationships just happen. You meet someone, you fall in love, you get married, and you have kids, and they just go just like that. They just flow and happen. And if they're not, then obviously you're not meant to be together, or obviously you're wrong, or you're broken, or and it's not true. Everybody's relationship takes work. All relationships do. Even with your children, they take work. Even with your own parents, like every relationship takes work. It's just learning to build that muscle of doing the work in your relationship, and that is actually what it takes to build this strong relationship. So we got into all those same issues. So
it was actually only 3 years ago now.
That we hit the hardest
time in our marriage. So it was actually quite recent, really. In the scheme of our whole relationship.
Well, we've been together since we were 14 and 15. So we kind of had a long run of the kind of easy bit because we were so young. But then it got hard quite quickly.
After having kids, and we really, our communication looked so different.
So different.
Than what it actually looks like.
There was barely any communication, if we're honest.
Well, especially on my part. Aston was doing all the communicating and there was nothing coming out of my mouth. I was like a rock. And the sad part about that is we weren't connecting. We felt like enemies. And we got to this really dark place where really the only option we thought we had was to get a divorce because things just weren't working. You felt like you were banging your head against a brick wall and sort of fighting a losing battle.
And as a woman, if you feel like you can't express yourself, like Gemma was saying, if you feel like you're suppressing how you feel, it makes you feel unsafe. And when you feel unsafe, you feel lonely. And women don't want to feel lonely. They want to feel loved. They want to feel supported. They want to feel connected. But when your partner isn't opening to you, when like Adam was very closed, I literally would say to him, you're like a rock, like no emotion would come out of him. And if emotion was coming out of me, he'd move in the other direction. He was like, whoa, like, I don't know what to do with that. And as we got older, it got harder and harder because a big part of communication in your relationship is emotional intelligence, being able to connect on an emotional level, especially if you're going to be in a long-term relationship. So that's something that we realized, we had needed to work on. And, it got really hard after we had our daughter, our second child, because I was stretched a lot thinner. You know, I was working, I had 2 children now. I needed, like, more was being asked from me in our family and in our life. So then I was asking more of Adam. And then this is where the problem comes, because men don't really realize, it's really strange. They don't really realize that with extra children is going to require more from them.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, what? I didn't know that was going to be part of it. And they're kind of shocked when it does happen. And whereas women intuitively know that we create the baby, we birth the baby, we know, you know, that more work is coming, more is being asked of me. So how we felt at that time, like Adam was really depressed.
Yeah.
He was in a really depressive place. He felt like he was failing.
I felt like I was unsuccessful as a man, which is the worst thing for a man, because in order for a man to really want to continue to lead his family and to be the best version of himself, he needs to feel successful and feel appreciated. And we're going to touch on that a little bit in this workshop. But I didn't feel any of those things. I was basically struggling to get out of bed. And just felt like a failure as a man. And it was these things that we're going to talk about today, which were creating that dynamic, things that I wasn't doing and things that Aston was doing, and a combination of those things together.
I knew that it didn't need to be this way, but like many women, I was not shown how to. When Adam went into that, I basically went into fear and survival. And I'm about to have another child. Like, you have to step up. What do you mean that you can't? Like, you know, I've been raised with a generation of men who just rose, who just got up and just did it. Like, there was no question. So, and we all have these stories that have been passed down, like that our mothers did this or our fathers did that. And this is how it's always been. So if our partner doesn't match that, that's where the problems begin. And it's actually impossible for us to continue to match who our parents were. But so many of us come to our relationships seeking for our partner to be the love that we didn't receive from one of our parents. And that sounds really strange, but it's really, really common. And it's a good idea to ask yourself, you know, because it will show up in your communication. Whose validation are you seeking? Whose validation are you still seeking out of your mum and your dad? And how can you see how you're then creating that in your relationship? And it might not be like, you know, mine was my mum, but Adam was bringing out similar things to my mum in our relationship. So I was playing the same pattern with Adam that I used to play with my mum. And you will start to see this with yourself, and then it shows up in your communication. So when this happened, I actually became excessively critical of Adam, really critical, really judgmental, shamed him a lot. Like, it's horrible for me to admit it, but I'm being completely honest and vulnerable that I didn't know how else to help him to change. And that's how I'd been shown. That's how I thought, you know, but through going through the whole process we did, we learned that is the last thing you want to do. If a man is already feeling unsuccessful, if you do that as a woman, like if they're struggling to, you know, if a man's struggling to hear you when you're expressing your truth, if they're not showing up as the best version of them, if they're making mistakes, if they're, you know, yelling and just losing it in times when you feel they shouldn't be, if you shame them, even with your energy, like sometimes I'd do it with my words, other times I'd give him silent treatment. Like, I think that's one of the worst ones. I would do that a lot. And it like would cut like ice, you know, that heavy toxic silent treatment, or stonewalling, or, you know, or if it was verbal, it was like the criticizing. And when I would do that, I would notice this thing in him after learning everything that we learned, that he would actually get worse. Adam wouldn't get better. He would get worse. He would shut down more. He would close more. And it would just feed his not enoughness. And then that would feed him not showing up in the relationship like I needed. And then that would feed my feeling of not being loved by him. So it's really important that we learn these things, because we realized that it wasn't so much each of us, it was learning the difference in us and how to show up for each other in those moments of stress, in those moments of tough conversations, in a way that actually supports us to bring out the best of ourselves. I was not supporting Adam to bring out the best in him, not on purpose, but I hadn't been taught, I hadn't been shown, I didn't know there was another way.
And I definitely wasn't supporting you
no.
to meet your 3 fundamental needs, which is to be safe, seen, and understood.